Alright folks, what's going on? It is time for our far too late, but always awesome, tier list. And we've got a pretty wicked distribution here going into Season 4 that we're going to quickly run through. Season 4 is in a pretty damn fun spot. So let's jump into it right away. There's some pretty neat groups out there. For those of you who have watched any of my videos in the past, I'm predominantly a tanker melee player. Ranged is still probably going to be our go-to meta here, but we will slowly build towards that. Starting off with our group composition, Supreme Awesome, Beauties, Consider Them, Doomed, Anyways, and Fook. We've got a couple of different, pretty wide distributions here to talk about. So we're going to go from, I'll call it lowest to highest. Affliction. Affliction is just like the least viable of all the Mythic Plus classes out there. Like, class amongst its own. That's why we're dropping it down here on the bottom. Next up, that's actually going to be it for F. Like, this is probably the only spec that I would even consider avoiding. Not the way I look at it, not even built for Mythic Plus. I know tier lists can sometimes be toxic, and people decide, hey, whether a player is viable or isn't viable depending on their class. That's never true, with the exception of Affliction. Avoid them, no matter what. All right, let's keep rolling here. Next up, I shouldn't call this controversial, but jumping all the way up to awesome, and we're going with Havoc Demon Hunter. Havoc is one of the more popular classes out there. Probably the only reason that they're not up and competing in the Supreme tier is because Vengeance. Vengeance is still, after Season 3, they're the meta tank going into Season 4. Their stops can't be touched, so it kind of knocks Havoc down a little bit. So Havoc's going to start set up there for now. That's probably the one of the few touchier classes that we'll get through here today. Next up, I'm going to go with Marksman down in the anyways. Is it possible to utilize Marksman? Yeah, totally. It is. Like, there's nothing wrong with them. Are they a super clutch go-to amazing class that brings a bunch of utility? Not overly. Like, they're just there. So if you've got a friend who's Marksman, make fun of them why they don't play any of the other classes, including survival, and we'll slowly work through what happens for them this season. I can't see them being too popular, to be brutally honest. Finally, the last one for the E tier, and I hate to do this, is my friend Fury Warrior. Fury is just in a funky spot this tier. Even though we've made some interesting movement, they're still not very compatible with a lot of the affixes that are out there, and that really hurts them. They're utilizing their Season 2 tier set, and that's just not quite going to be enough. They bring the raid buff battle shout, but still, that's not enough, especially with the ranged compositions that we're going to see here. All right, after that, we're going to make our way up into Doomed. And I don't know if Doomed is going to be as bad as some people are saying, but we did see that Enhance was not popular at all, unfortunately, in this part of the season. And just checking them out, like, Enhance to me, I'm really surprised that it didn't actually morph a little bit into something closer to an Augment Evoker. But really, the class hasn't received any changes in Season 4. Their tier set's unchanged. They're kind of the lower end of the bracket. They can help a fair bit more with affixes than the classes we were just discussing. But still, you run into issues when you're target capped, and that's the biggest issue that's holding back Enhance. Next one that we're going to sneak in here, if you can accept my pun, is going to be our friend the Frost Death Knight. So Froth TK doesn't get a ton of love anywhere really. Like they do bring a lot more utility. They got a buff to their season 2 tier set, so that will help them. They're definitely going to be bursty, which is great, but they really struggle to sustain damage, and they really kind of have weird aggro issues if you've played with a lot of Frost TKs here. So just needs a slight little bit of improvement. Its utility is solid, like nothing amazing, but I personally like them, but I'm biased to melee for the most part. Alright, up next, never pretty to put them down here, but it's better than them being an F tier. I'm going to throw Assassination Rogue into the Doom distribution as well. Similar to Enhance, it didn't receive any changes in Season 4. Tier set they're keeping is unchanged. Basically, it's the exact same spec. It's got the great overall toolkit, mobility, survivability that the Rogue class has, but spec-wise, it just doesn't compete with the other two Rogue specs that are out there, and we'll certainly touch on them shortly. Next up, and I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, this will be a little bit, I'm not going to call it controversial, but Feral Druid, I had them and consider them, but in North America, Season 4 has just gone live, and Feral are absolutely crushing. So I'm moving them up from C up into B here. Consider Feral. It's always something that I don't typically lean towards, but they are crushing, absolutely crushing the meters out there. At the moment, Feral brings a ton of survivability. They have pretty wicked bleeds. They've got, from a utility perspective, one of the best packages of all the specs, right up there. I'd say probably with like a Ret Paladin. They're tanky, like you can be in bear form whenever you want, right? It's hard to compete with that. It's a real solid choice if you want to play or if you want to mix it up, because ultimately their tier set is remaining the same. So if you didn't get a chance to play them in Season 3, Season 4 might be the time to start to consider them. Because I had them in consider, knock them up into beauty. Up next, this was one of my go-to DPS specs over Season 3. Arms Warrior. There's no buffs, really. Like, ultimately, their tier set got a little improved from Season 1. I actually thought Arms was in a great spot Season 1. So we're going to remain a pretty solid melee choice. Ultimately, you're not going to see Ignore Pain as part of the rotation, so that's going to be awkward. They're still going to pump out huge damage from a perspective, but you're not going to see the utility that really is going to push them up the charts in Mythic Plus. I'm holding my breath for the War Within to help warriors out a little bit here. I'd love to main a DPS warrior. I've been maining protection warriors over a few seasons now, or a few expansions now. But we'll see what comes. Up next is a class that I feel does not get enough love. Elemental Shaman didn't get any real changes as far as Season 3. Their tier set remains the same as what they were utilizing. Damage-wise, they were really competitive towards the end of the season. Low target counts, they're able to funnel. Single target, like overall, Elemental, don't sleep on them. Their AoE and burst isn't fantastic compared to some of the other classes, but if you're actually like pushing higher keys and pulls start to last longer, they start to catch up with some of the burstier classes out there. They don't have a great defensive profile. That's always one of the slights that are going to nip any of the shaman classes, and we'll see what happens here. But I think that they're not that far away from being pushed up. If they were a little bit less squishy, you'd be up there with the warlocks. Like they're just missing that tankiness and a raid buff, of course. That's always going to be a bit problematic. Where do we want to go next? This will catch some people by surprise, because initially I had Survival way down here. Survival hasn't been super competitive You could tell me that survival's doomed. However, I know they've got weak defenses. I know they don't have a raid buff. I know they don't have a very strong damage profile in AoE or single target. I just think they bring a bunch of fun here. And if you want to argue with me and say, like, no way, man, marksmanship should at least be in the bottom tier and survival should be in the higher one, we could debate that, but I'm not putting up much of a fight. You need at least one hunter class up here. We're going to see two, and that's not going to come as a shock to anybody who's been playing a hunter for the duration of WoW. They've always been popular, and Blizz always makes them so that they're semi-viable. Up next, we've got some more rogues that are going to start to materialize here. So, where are we jumping? We're almost into that point where it's time to jump into the beauties. I know I kind of got ahead of myself with the Demon Hunter and the Feral Druid. We are going to sub rogue next. So they're still using their tier 3 set. I'm going to put them as consider them, but you can knock them up into beauties, truthfully. I think there's really no shortcomings that come with sub rogues, so they're in a pretty fun spot overall. They're one of the best performing classes. They don't really have a lot of downside associated with them. Really, the biggest things that we're going to talk about with sub rogues is that they're not outlaw. That's the probably only downside, because outlaw is absolutely pumping. We're going to talk about that. All right, last couple for consider them. I'm going to go with our friends Beastmaster, and like that shouldn't be a big surprise. They're still using their tier 3 tier sets. There's no real big changes there. Beastmaster was performing really well. They were super popular. That I feel like at the end of season 3, almost every group, if not every second group I was in, pug-wise, had a hunter or two in there. Like, they were just damn popular. I think the Nethelrax, Enemy of the Sky bow, is getting upgraded here. So there's a few things. Ultimately, they still don't bring a raid buff. Their survivability is kind of up there with, I don't know, what we could say the other hunter classes and shaman, like super popular range class. But ultimately, like, still a concern to allow them to keep pushing. So more to come on Beast Mastery. Next ones, and I said we were going to be a little stacked towards range classes, and I'm not lying about that. Next up, you're going to see us start to jump up towards what I'm going to call the beauty classes. So Feral, I actually had Feral down in consider. I had to pull them up after looking at the meters this morning. They're pumping. But after that, you're actually going to see a few more classes that we're pretty familiar with. So Frost Mage, definitely consider them. They're keeping their tier 3 set. Their gameplay is going to continue to revolve around Glacial Spike. They're really like more of an AoE as opposed to a single target damage profile. But they're in a great spot. Fantastic utility, high mobility, some of the best defensives in the game for a range class. Like, yeah, I can't say enough positive things about Frost Mage. I think they're an automatic yes when I consider classes. And then I'll call them just a shade behind them, Arcane Mage, which I like. I never know where Arcane's going to land. I was watching Arcane roll with Yoda. They were pushing a plus 10 on Twitch last night. And whoever was playing it was absolutely blasting. They're using their tier 3 set as well. They've got this great burst profile. And like all mages or all magic classes, they're going to be paired up with Vengeance Demon Hunters the vast majority of the time, which only buffs them further. Really, Arcane Mage, like, they're going to be excellent for our plus, well, what used to be plus 20s, which will now be plus 10s. That mid to high key, that's really where mobs are going to be able to survive their full bursts and they're not just going to flop down before we get through the whole rotation. Up next is a fun class, and we're going to talk about Windwalker Monk. Windwalker was absolutely crushing it back in Shadowlands, and I thought we were taking a huge break from them. They didn't receive a lot of love throughout the season, but they've got Wicked Burst with a improved Season 1 tier set on both AoE and single target. That's excellent for keys, like, to be brutally honest with you. They're incredibly fantastic. They've got wicked utility. I think we're going to see more Windwalker Monks. Mystic Touch is still excellent because we do have a fair amount of melee classes that we're going to be able to at least consider in this range. So I think you're going to see Windwalker carry groups here. Havoc already kicked them upward. Let's see who else is kicking around here now on my list. So this might catch people by surprise, but this unholy bad boy is still in the scene. So I've got Unholy just on the fence between being a B tier or an A tier. And I'm actually going to throw them up into A tier. They're still using their tier 3 set. It's been tuned up just a little bit. Even though they're not as bursty as they were at the start of this expansion with Dragonflight, they're going to continue to be a powerhouse of burst in Season 4. They've got wicked sustained damage that we're going to see, and it's one of the few classes that can do amazing single target and AoE damage within the same profile. Got wicked utility, they're wicked durable. I think they're fantastic. Like, AMZ protects a lot of people. Like, I think overall we got to be pretty happy with Unholy where it's sitting currently. It's a lot of fun if you're lining up all your major cooldowns and dropping them with Unholy. So no big changes there. Next one might surprise people a little bit. We got to throw a Drago in here to awesome. And it's not the augmentation evoker. So Devastation, they're using their Season 2 tier set. It's been buffed up. It's going to be a lot of fun. They're going to put up huge damage numbers now that the tier 2 set is back. They're going to have access to the Nazuru legendary staff that they utilize. So, or fist weapon that they utilize. And ultimately, it's one of the most powerful legendaries that are out there. It's really given your group a primary stat buff and a speed buff every time it's used. So I didn't play Devastation. I didn't play a whole lot of Evoker, to be brutally honest. The thought of a Lizard Wizard didn't really appeal to me that much, but this is definitely one of the best ranged options as we're looking at comps. If you're playing with a Devastation who has the Lego, you're going to be having a lot of fun. It's got pretty wicked range, whether it's the 25-yard abilities, but ultimately being grouped up with Demon Hunter tanks, they're going to blast. I'm going to slide this bad boy up a little bit. No offense to all these other specs, but Fire Mage, they're using their tier 2 set. They were super popular if you can think back to Season 2. Ultimately, Fire Mage, it's going to excel in those higher keys where mobs live longer. They've got their cauterize ability. They're wicked durable. They're really one of those classes that they're going to absolutely blast. The only issue with Fire Mage is that if you're playing in lower keys, mobs will die so quick that you won't benefit from the Mastery Ignite build. But overall, they bring Time Warp, Polymorph, Arcane Intellect, Dragon's Breath, Blast Wave, Ice Nova, Ring of Frost, Remove Curse, Spell Steal. Like, you can go on and on. Fire Mage is an absolute animal. And the last awesome one, and I am 100% biased to this, but I'm going to call it the best melee class going into Season 4, and I expect we'll all be sick of them, and they'll get nerfed into the ground for the war within. We have to have a little chat about Ret. Ret is in a tremendously fun spot here. If you happen to pick up your legendary in Season 3, you're already ahead of the game. They bring a huge amount of utility. There's no change there. They're incredibly reliable. They've got Wicked Burst. They can support the group as from a utility perspective on a lot of different dungeons. Like, the damage profile is excellent. I think they're a top choice. Like, I know Feral is a little busted in terms of the output that we're seeing with them right now. If they don't get nerfed, I'd say Ret stays here. If they do get nerfed, Ret's going to stay here. Let me say that a little differently. If Feral keeps on its current tear, then it'll compete. And that's okay. Like, I know Blizz is trying to do their best to get rid of hybrid classes. I love hybrid classes. I think they bring a bunch of utility, superior utility, and that makes the game fun for me. Lastly, on the awesome tier, we need to talk about our friend Balance Druid, or the Magic Woodland Chicken. Balance overall, like, they bring that Druid buff. If you're not playing with a Resto Druid, which like most groups will be, like, they are an absolute utility to have. They're going to get your verse jacked up. They're going to bring a whole bunch of utility, whether it's Solar Beam, Entangling Roots, Innervate, Stampeding Roar, Mark of the Wild, like I mentioned, Soothe, Hibernate, Typhoon. Like, there's a ton of utility that's here. They're going to be utilizing their tier set from Season 1, and similar to the other higher-end ranged classes, the longer that mobs live, the higher the damage profile you'll see from Balanced Druid. So they're in a really fun spot. Now we get to jump into the really fun classes, right? So let's do this, and then we'll see if I missed anyone. I'm going to go straight to the top right away. Hopefully this isn't a shocker for people. If you haven't seen, if you didn't know, Destro Warlock, they're using their Season 1 tier, and they are absolutely crushing from a damage profile. Their AoE mass damage is nuts. So the meta's going to favor casters. This is going to be the highest DPS class or spec that's out there. Load up on them. Really easy sell. They bring a bunch of utility that's also helpful, but this is going to be the strongest DPS choice probably that you'll see for this season. Up next is a little bit of a blast from the past, because this class has been, or spec's been kicked around a lot. Shadow Priest is getting their Season 2 setback, which will be a big help. They still bring Power Word, Fortitude. Ultimately, a raid-wide buff in a dungeon is a huge help. They've got some wicked damage profiles that we had seen from them in Season 4 after they've gone through what felt like another rework here midway through the expansion. So between that and Power Word Infusion, like, you're going to see Shadow Priest continue to be super popular. Ultimately, like, Mind Soothe won't have as much utility as it did last season, but there's a bunch of benefits that are there. Up next for our superior tier, we've got Augmentation Evoker. Shouldn't be a huge shock here. They enhance the survivability of everyone out there. They enhance the damage or the healing of everyone out there. They're going to have access to the jacked up legendary. I'm not going to pronounce that again, but the fist weapon that gains your primary stat and speed. That there's really very few downsides to having an Augmentation Evoker. They're going to be in all the meta classes if you're looking to really push some content. So keep your eyes open for them. Their Mythic Plus utility is unparalleled. Finally, you're like sitting back wondering what else is going on. I'm going to sneak one more class in here. I'm not going to put them up into Supreme, but I'm going to put them ahead of Havoc, which should catch a few people by surprise. Outlaw Rogue is using their tier 3 set. They're performing exceptional in single target and AoE. The utility that they bring, their survivability is exceptional. Really, their AoE is a little bit capped, but like we don't see all the time pulls more than 8 mobs. So that's probably the only thing that's keeping them from being a supreme class. If they were uncapped, I would say they could go up there. I'm thinking about Brackenhide Hollow. We're going to see huge pulls as the season goes on. That's probably going to be one of the few areas that they get tied up a little bit. And lastly, if you're keeping track down below, I'm going to slip this group. I had them at the bottom of Supreme. I'm going to kick them into Awesome right now. Demonology Warlock, both the Warlock class or specs are tanky as hell, except for Ult Affliction that we started with. They've got great burst for their AoE damage. They've got great consistency. They're solid from a single target perspective. They've got a wicked utility package. I think they're going to be excellent. Like if the damage profile of Destro wasn't so busted, you could argue that Demonology was going to be able to fight up there. I could have them here. I could throw them there. They could fit anywhere. So I'll put that up to debate. Let me know if you made it this far in the comments. What did we get right? What did we miss on? And I'll talk to y'all soon. Thanks for watching, folks. Take care and enjoy Season 4. The War Within is coming. Peace.